What was something that you saw at work that was so fucked up, you quit? A job at an as advertised on TV place. They were heavily advertising electric female leg hair removers. And had a batch of faulty leg hair removers that they were still sending out to customers despite knowing they were faulty. Almost all of the leg hair removers were being returned. And my job was to clean and repackage the used faulty machines so that they looked and opened and could be sent out to new customers. I quit the job by lunchtime on my first day. I reported a faulty safety lock on a hydraulic ramp to my boss. And instead of taking the issue seriously, he decided to berate me in front of the other workers, claiming the ramp was safe. He started shoving it to prove that I was wrong, and one of my co-worker joined in. The lock then let go, causing the ramp to shoot out suddenly, pinning the co-worker to a wall. Luckily one of the draw chains got caught so the ramp didn't pierce the guy's chest. I was basically done with that job after that. The billionaire CEO of a company dressing down a staff member in front of 500 plus people, invoking the name of his mother during said rant and pushing full-on lies about this person. The CEO had literally called an all-hands meeting simply to publicly disgrace this employee, only for doing his job as it was written in his contract, that I later pulled for reference as I had admin access at the time. Yep. Bye. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. One night there was a shooting in the store and the manager locked everyone in the walk-in. I quit as soon as we got out. Quit Radio Shack because of how hard they pushed me to sell warranties to people who didn't need them. Think like an 80-year-old woman buying a pack of double A rechargeable batteries and me getting in trouble for not trying to sell her a warranty on the batteries. I was 16 and hired after 3 interviews to do door-to-door sales. It did not pay unless you hit a quota that sounded insane. I quit in 5 minutes. I hope everyone else got smart and ran away, but no one else walked out. I worked at a fast food restaurant, and a customer had a heart attack. The paramedics pronounced him dead when they got there. They just made all of us keep working like nothing happened. I was 17 at this point, and I'd never seen another person die. I finished my shift, went home, and cried the rest of the night. I gave my 2 weeks notice the next day. My boss was a functioning alcoholic, but then started a sexual relationship with an employee. Publicly. In the office. Full-blown exhibitionism. Nope. I'm out. I had a full amount of vacation and sick. Never missed a day. My dog suddenly passed. I wanted to leave to deal with it. My boss said no, and you can get another one of those for $25 at the pound. So no. I quit on the spot. And left. Boss said all black people should go on a slow boat back to Africa because he hates them over a lunch meeting to discuss giving me more work. My oldest sister, the babysitter, the dad came home wasted, stripped naked, and tried to have sex with my sister. She called the cops and he got arrested for attempting to have sex with a minor. She was 16 at the time. Didn't quit because of this, ended up getting a better job. Worked security at a California winery. Saw how they did their grape crushing was a disgusting process. They would just dump all the crap from the grape field and grind everything together. Saw rats and snakes scurrying out the grinder during the process. When I first started out as an apprentice steel fabricator, I was working at a small shop. I needed a second pair of hands for a minute. Boss was right there. So I asked him for help. He turns to me and says, "I'm not your $N and at quit on the spot. Fuck him and fuck racism." Used to work for the market-leading telco in Australia. Outbound warm calling sales, cross-sell and upsell to people who already had an account. We had a project where fully 60-70% of the people we called were 80 plus and mostly senile. We were expected to push products on them. Many were in nursing homes. Some didn't know what a mobile phone was. This was 2006 or 7. To cover my ass from the bad sales numbers, I'd leave notes to the effect of "called on outbound campaign X. Did not believe customer capable of giving informed consent over the phone to this offer under unconscionable sales conduct provisions of Trade Practices Act. Someone had prepared that list for us to call. Not as conventionally fucked up as some other things on this thread. I worked at USPS for a few months. It was expected that you work 12 14-hour days. 6 days a week. Mostly 7. Seeing the amount of people that were close to retiring after doing that for 40 years was heartbreaking. Hardly any off time. Little room for advancement. Every raise or day off you will ever receive has been set since day one. That's the American way. Live to work. I quit shortly after they were doing everything in their power to not let me off for medical issues. I got a job at a restaurant and have the regular come in almost daily. We get to chatting and he's telling me how he's put decades worth of pay. Hundreds of thousands. Into a college fund for his kids so they might have an easier human life. Saw people actually working hard. WTF. Ain't needing that. Bounced. There was a woman that spoke limited English who wanted to cancel her subscription, but because she couldn't specifically say cancel my subscription they didn't, even though they knew that's what she wanted. They also put her on a platinum plan when they damn well knew she didn't need the software, and if she did she only needed basic. I didn't witness something per se. But after not being scheduled for any shifts for a month at a part-time job, my boss called me out of the blue and started screaming at me for complaining to other staff about not getting a permanent position. I waited until she was finished and very calmly told her that I hadn't been there for a month. Nor did I have any contact info for other staff members. So how exactly would I have been complaining to anyone? Her mood shifted instantly and she just laughed it off and said, "Oh. Ha ha ha. Well, this place does love rumors." The entire thing was so off-putting and insane I put my notice in that weekend. I've been forced to spray blankets with diluted disinfectant in an unused hotel banquet room, and that is what we are doing to disinfect these blankets after they're used by guests in this pandemic. To be quickly recirculated back into rooms for new guests to use. No wash. No dry clean. Nothing. A few squirts from this bottle and you're done. This is during the pandemic BTW. I still work for them. There is literally nowhere else to work right now. The ball kind of started rolling when a developer took their own life and the boss was more worried about the tasks he left behind. Working as a nurse in a nursing home, I saw the rollout of a new drug prescribed to every patient in the building with no medical checks prior to giving. And very botched consent forms, as a lot of patients had severe dementia. This drug was completely new to the market and a drug of this type had never been used. Let alone on such a large scale. The third person they gave the drug to started convulsing uncontrollably about 12 hours after and were taken to hospital. Sadly, they passed away the next day, but the doctors claimed the death wasn't related to the new drug even though this person's medical history was clear except for diabetes and hypertension. I refused to be part of it, so I quit that day and refused to work my notice period. My boss at large soda company searched my car for competitor product containers after seeing me drink one on my lunch hour. Which was followed by him berating me in front of the whole restaurant. I really needed a job in university and went to an interview posted on a board at the university center. There was no interview. Everyone who showed got a desk, a computer and a lot of people to call. That night we were calling to sell tickets to a circus and you could buy tickets or purchase donations for kids to go. I spoke to one old lady who seemed so happy just to talk to someone and she bought a pile of tickets. I had no idea if she could afford it or just bought them because I called her. I walked out on my first break. Just couldn't be that person to someone's mom. I worked at a popular franchise restaurant that serves mashed potatoes. The place was a shithole. But I needed the job at the time of hire. The people were lame, bitter and disgruntled. One day I was going back to the back prep line and saw some of the management staff pissing in the mixer the potatoes were being mixed in. They served that shit. I walked out after I threw what was on the lined steam table on the floor. They basically said PPE was for pussies. I witnessed the district manager of a pizza place use her fingernails, ungloved, to poke holes in pizza dough because using the tool takes too long or some BS. Noped out ASAP. I worked as a lube tech for a little while. My coworkers were bringing cocaine to work to spice things up. And one of them thought it would be funny to show me a dead horse that a customer brought in. I was like, fuck this, not working here anymore. What kind of arsehole brings a dead horse to the oil change place with him? And what other kind of arsehole jokes about it and then shows his new co-worker? Not me. But a friend worked at a coffee shop. And they would give out the coffee grounds so people could put them in the garden. One day some guy comes up, opens the coffee ground bag and starts eating it. Handfuls of coffee grounds. My friend quit there right on the spot. My supervisor dating my girlfriend, who also worked there, found a rather large spider in the cheese at a pizza place. Not what was seen, but what was heard. My boss had been drinking at the bar when the news broke about Michael Brown. He started laughing and said, "That word deserved what he got." I walked out and never looked back. I was working at a bar. Came in on my day off and an old guy I was sitting next to started chatting with me. This was 20 plus years ago. He tells me he was a B-52 gunner in World War II. I'm thinking there aren't a lot of these guys alive anymore, so I'm asking about what it was like. He describes how cold it was that high up. Plane is basically an open tube with guns sticking out of all sides and a shitload of bombs stacked next to you. Then he says, yeah, we were on the wrong side of that war. Can't believe I put up with all that bullshit. Fucking Jews ruining the world. I went to drink somewhere else and never saw him in there again. Worked at small burger shop. The day started off with refilling ketchup bottles, but the giant can opener was faulty, so metal shavings and random parts would fall into the ketchup. I made it about 3 hours in. Until they had me scrape mold off of the walk-in fridge walls and pour bleach on the areas. Then they wanted me to change all the dates on the foods but make sure they didn't have mold on them, could pass the health inspection happening later in the week. I work in DoorDash, and one time a client put a report on me saying I didn't deliver the food even when I gave it to him in the hand. I worked as a bike tour guide. Had a client have a heart attack on tour, which he died from. Had to give him CPR until the paramedics came. Console his adult daughter who was on tour with us. And manage the rest of the group who were in various states of panic and shock for the rest of the trip. I think I got paid like $750 a week for those tours. Quit by the end of the season. Listening to my boss openly talk about sex and sex-related topics loudly at work. I went to lunch and refused to come back. Advance Auto Parts. Never again. Management bitching about subordinates doing perfectly reasonable things, egg taking their accrued leave to say goodbye to their dying mother overseas. Fuck that. People jumping free falling from the World Trade Centers during 9/11. I was working in TV news. Sad pensive face. I didn't quit, but it was more than fucked up. I was a bus driver and a guy I worked with got squashed between his bus and the one parked in front of his because he didn't apply the handbrake. The CEO at a healthcare non-profit where I worked a while back confessed to me one day that she delivered a case of booze each week to a raging alcoholic in exchange for a large donation to the non-profit. Aside from the fact that they were engaging in tax fraud, IRS rules rate charitable giving are strict around not receiving anything in exchange for the donation, and if you do, you have to deduct the cost of the gift from the donation before claiming it on your taxes as a charitable donation. It is incredibly unethical. I put in my 2-week notice the next day. When my boss angrily ranted about how expensive a certain freelancer was, that he would pay a few hundreds of dollars for just a PDF of few pages. Which wasn't even true. We would get the material when we paid the last bit. And the total invoice sum was for like a day of work. A legacy error-prone piece of software was refactored by a developer at the manager's request. He presented his proof of concept in a conference room in front of the whole tech team. His manager let other developers rip him apart and didn't even stick up for him. I knew I was part of a toxic culture and bounced soon after. Blockbuster during the decline. Right before it went out of business. Had my first manager quit. They bring in this old short fat bald Italian ladies man to run the store. Dude fired 5 employees except for me, shift supervisor, and the chick with DDs. From there he then refused to hire anyone with less than a C cup. And fired them when it turned out he couldn't touch them. After the 5th woman asked me for the corporate HR number. Or what our policy on harassment was. I asked why. Quit myself shortly after. Late to the party but medial with it. I was working at a local steakhouse. I was working the Pan's pasta station, which had a microwave for some reason. The grill cook was also the kitchen supervisor, who had been working at this place for 30 years, and wouldn't take any kind of criticism about how he handled the kitchen or his station. One dinner rush. We're about as busy as we always are when I notice the grill cook behind me as I'm plating a pasta or something. Without a word to me, not so much as a behind, he reaches over my plate with a raw chicken breast. Puts that raw chicken in the microwave for 9 minutes. And slapped it on the grill to get grill marks. I put my 2 weeks notice in that day. Was working as manager of an apparel department. I was formally reprimanded for not forcing one of my employees to stand while folding clothes in the dressing room. She was a single mom and several months pregnant working 8+ hour shifts. I was not about to make her stand up and not use a chair to do a job she could just as easily do sitting down just because the store manager thought it looked lazy. He told me to go home and think about being a better leader, i.e. being an unnecessary jerk. Went home. Put on a suit. Went back and told him I was leaving and telling the department why. They all had my back. I worked for a small MSP in the UK until this year. They had me going to sites across all the UK. With no PPE and customers ignoring mask rules. Under the guise of emergencies, which once included driving a HMI cable from Petersfield to Southampton. Just got my shit together and left. I do accounting. One transaction that I was responsible for reviewing and approving was a monthly bonus to the CEO. One day the bonus jumped from $10,000 to $50,000 and continued to increase. Then bonus time comes around and I was told we didn't have a good year and would not get even 50% of our target bonus for employees. Then they didn't increase salaries to match inflation. So I quit. The company ended up having a whistleblower. And the CEO and CFO were replaced. Had a go at real estate. Was told to daily go to investigate the local bulletin boards to look for anyone who has died. The sooner the better. Was then told to find a contact to their closest living relative and call them asking if they want to sell the deceased member's flat. Trade it or buy one. Preferably the same day that person died before any competition can get to them. What the fuck? My boss said we weren't allowed to tell our co-workers if we came in contact with COVID-19. Only him. This was to make people work even if they had been in contact with the virus. And it was a food service place, so that drove me to submit my 2 weeks. I saw myself being unhappy with my job. I was actually hired to sell speakers out of the back of a van in Walmart parking lots. No idea how I got wrangled into that one. Quit immediately. When I was a teenager I worked at this cheap fast food chain hibachi place. The chef dropped a sushi roll on the ground on the drain on the floor and the owner told him to put it back on the plate. I should have said something, but the customer was yelling at me and just being a huge dick to me, so I didn't see it. As an adult I would never let that happen, even if they are a dick though. I quit kinda soon after that. I got in trouble for saying words that people didn't like, and the person who missed the beginning part of their shift because they were hungover got nothing. So I quit the Navy. So during the height of the pandemic I started work at a cheesecake factory. The line manager was quite douchey and would rather fuck around than do their job. The man was infamous for scratching his balls and adjusting them in front of people. Obviously he had zero shame and self-control. The fucked up thing he did was literally scratch his ass. Pick a wedgie, like practically finger his asshole. Then adjusted himself all without gloves and in a single movement. I finished work that day and never went back. I worked for a mental health firm. I was essentially told to ignore a high-risk client for a day to work with someone who was less of a risk and didn't even need regular check-ins. My high-risk client counted on my usual phone calls to help her regulate, and despite my protests I was told to leave her alone. I begged her clinician to call her in my place and she said she would but never did. I found out the next day that my client attempted suicide. She didn't blame me, and this was all because they didn't take my warnings seriously. I was already getting fed up with that place, but I threw my notice on my supervisor's desk that day and told her, this is on you. Small mom and pop restaurant. My first job as a dishwasher. The owner came back and set 2 white buckets in front of me and told me to scrape carrots into one and corn into the other from the plates as they came back since we were running low. The plan was to reheat and serve them. I refused and she threw a butter knife at me. I walked straight to the phone and called my brother to come pick me up, then went and sat outside on the stoop until he arrived. Looking back, I'm sure there was plenty more I could have done. But I knew that just wasn't for me. STDs. Finance manager jonesing for a deal reversed the buyer's income from 25k to 52k. Banks would approve. If credit score is high enough, banks won't require proof. While a loan approved and most likely a buyer's remorse situation where they're buying too much vehicle. I reported it to the GM and then the owner. They literally didn't care. I cared. I quit. I cannot work in an environment like that. That was 14 years ago though. Cannot remember what day it is now, sad pensive face, so working is not possible. I worked for an Alaskan cruise company and we were booking berths in a ship that wasn't even built yet. There was no way we were gonna make the maiden voyage claim. And we all knew it. But I would take daily calls from excited seniors and people planning bucket list trips. I figured the Seattle-based company I worked at wanted the deposit dollars. And would keep the interest and worry about refunds down the road. Lying with a straight face on the phone just caught up with me and I quit before it all hit the fan. I knew those of us on the phones would take the furious blowback of this before management ever would. I was in my first 12 months at Home Depot. We had this end-of-year store-wide corporate presentation. We were to be given a breakfast and a holiday bonus of sorts. The bonus amount depended on tenure. The whole presentation was videos of Home Depot execs going on and on and on about how many millions, maybe even billions, they had secured that year. My bonus was small. Again based on tenure. But my hourly wage was also very, very small. My breakfast was also very, very cold, pancakes, bacon, etc. I couldn't believe they made all this money but paid like shit. Refused enough hours to earn benefits and gave a cold hot breakfast. I left the meeting when it was finished and I never returned. I had just moved to Nevada. And was trying out work. A call center picked me up. We were selling seed subscriptions. All of the people on the list were old and vulnerable. I kept asking many questions because it was all suspicious as hell. So none of the old people thought the flowers came pre-grown. None knew really that it was a monthly fee. And most didn't have anywhere to plant these seeds. They threatened to fire me if I didn't get back on the phone. And I told them to mail me a check and shove it. I rarely missed work and was never late. I was at the hospital waiting for my first niece to be born, so I called and said I would be late. My manager very sarcastically asked if I had to hold her hand. I said my brother-in-law would do that. I showed up only about an hour late and he very angrily said, "Good, now finish this work," and pointed to what he needed done. As he walked away he very sarcastically said, "Oh, by the way, congratulations." I instantly started looking for a new job, and no joke, within a month of my exit he and my immediate 2 supervisors were all transferred. Not me but my father. He worked as a babysitter for my uncle, well called Jay. The first time he went to said uncle's house to babysit, he found out Jay was a hoarder. His house was infested with mice and rats. His kids were infested with head lice. Jay didn't care. Their mother died of cancer. His house was infested with lice, rats, mice, gnats, you name it. I worked at a company where 80% of the employees speak a language I am not fluent with. First day at the job. The boss, whom I liked, took the whole team out to lunch and everybody was talking in this language to each other and looking like they were having fun. A few made polite conversations with me, but as I was new, We didn't have a good rapport yet. When my boss called them out for their rudeness, things at the table got awkward, and let's just say it was one of the most awful welcome lunch ever. I told my boss I didn't think I could fit in and quit at the end of the day. Just thinking about working alongside these people made me miserable. I worked at a debt collector's, and they were only supposed to add on any charges to the original debt if a collector had to go out to the person's property. I noticed on a case I was working on that 3 charges had been added to this account but no notes from the bailiff, which was weird. I asked my manager, who told me that they occasionally just add the charges up front, as a bailiff will probably have to go out at some point, and we are talking like £120 per charge for nothing. I left 2 days later. Management didn't tell me that the trash compactor lock was broken. So while I was doing the trash, not part of my job description but they made me do it anyways, a 1,500 pounds dumpster unhooked and pinned me to the wall. It hit the wall so hard it put a 4-inch deep hole through it. Nearly broke my arm. If I didn't stick my arm up in time, I am sure it would have shattered my ribs. Management said I had an altercation with a trash can, then shortly after told me I should put in my 2 weeks. I quit on the spot and essentially told them to go fuck themselves. The trash can is just the tip. There was a long list of neglect, lying to our faces, and extremely homophobic comments towards me for being the only gay person there. I worked at a real estate agency for about 10 days. The realtor made a few sexist and racist jokes. But the last straw came on Halloween. He was handing out candy to kids passing by the storefront, and when 2 little Asian boys came up, he said, "You don't even want candy, do you? You'd rather I give you some math problems," and laughed. I walked out and quit the next day. Fast food. Rebagging food with new expiration dates. Reported to corporate, who apparently was the sister of manager. So next day manager called me into office because corporate said exactly who reported it. I got yelled at for telling corporate instead of going to head manager. Culprit was assistant manager. Didn't get in trouble. Put in my 2 weeks notice. Assistant manager scheduled me on her shift those 2 weeks. Shifts I never work normally. So I turned in my uniform instead and said I'll be back in 2 weeks for my final check. Never have I worked harder for less money and gotten in trouble for doing the right thing than I have at fast food. Watched my boss literally lick spilt wine off the floor. Yes. Lick. Also watched her wash her feet in the sink for cleaning the vegetables. She had just been working outside in her personal garden without any footwear. She came in and I watched her left her leg and barefoot into the sink. I almost hurled. Also watched her try a little kid's chocolate milk before bringing it out to him to make sure it was strong enough. Restaurant industry BTW. This was 12-ish years ago.